Hotspot. So, hey everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us for our latest webinar on contracts and budgets. And we know this is something that a lot of you audience members and clients and potential clients and just people generally interested in real estate, or not real estate, clinical trials, and real estate. Contracts and budgets are very important in real estate also. You can tell where my mind is at. You can tell where my mind's at today. So, contracts and budgets in clinical research. I've got Chris Sauber here. Chris is going to be talking about what he does best, which is contracts and budgets.
That's what I do best.
And yeah, so it is what you do best. So why don't you take the mic? I'm going to figure out how to move these slides, and we'll get it going. Negotiating contracts and budgets.
Okay, so let's see where to begin. Well, I could actually start with an email I just received maybe 10 minutes ago. One of our clients, and we will do this for you if you want to become a client, if you're not already. But one of our clients asks, is it too late to cancel the study prior to signing the contract? No, it's not. I would say it's a bad form to cancel a study, say you're no longer interested in the study after signing the contract. But in this particular client's case, what I'm recommending is why not try and negotiate the budget above and beyond what you would typically get. Make it more worth his while to maybe consider taking the study. He has very few patients and he's concerned about the design of the study. But if you get the right contract or right budget, I think that can curtail any problematic issues with the protocol. So in this situation, and I would recommend this to everybody, maybe if you're not too interested in this study, I mean, you were awarded the study, you went through the whole process, you find out some information about the study, maybe at the site selection visit that makes you think, maybe I don't want this study. Well, if you can get a substantial budget, then it might be worth your while. I know this is a little bit off topic, but there is one counterpoint to this. So if you're working with a big CRO or sponsor, they may find you difficult to work with if you ask for too much. Now, there's not a lot of communication within sponsors and CROs. So I don't know how much that would play out against you asking for an exorbitant amount in your budget. Anyhow, getting on to actually negotiating the budget and contract. So do you have any, is there any specifics on the slides?
Yeah, so first slide, always, so here's the step one. If you do nothing else, learn nothing else from this webinar, let's say you're not good at keeping up with details, even though the replay, this is being recorded, it's going to go on YouTube. Anyone who registered is going to get a copy of the replay link. If you do nothing else, just negotiate your budget, okay? You don't have to be a pro at negotiating it, but just negotiate. Many sites, especially the research naive sites, choose not to negotiate a budget because they think that they're going to lose the study.
We heard a number in regards to this. What we hear? Like 40% of all sites do not negotiate budgets. They just accept what's sent. We heard a number not too long ago.
Yeah,
from a sponsor or somebody.
It's around that. It's certainly a lot higher when it's research naive. It's a lot higher. But yeah, that sounds about right. And research naive sites might be like 80% of them.
Sure.
And so Amy did a really good job on these slides. Many sites believe they will lose the study if they try to negotiate the budgets, but this is not true.
No. Yes, you can lose the budget or lose the study. One particular case that comes to mind, we didn't lose the study. We just chose not to take the study. We gave them our minimal demands. This is first site Dan and I own. And they just wouldn't come up to that. So we said, well, sorry, we're not interested in your study then. And it actually turned out to be a very good thing because that sponsor went broke. And many sites didn't get paid for that study. So be aware, if they're unable to come up to a certain price point that is reasonable, then there's probably some money problems there, I would guess, at least in my experience. as the sponsor went broke. And we were still on the email chain. So when we saw that many sites were not getting paid for the study, I was like very thankful that we never took that study. So just be aware that that you can't. You will have the opportunity to reject the study. Essentially, the steps in negotiating a study is you're put in place, or negotiating a budget. You're put in contact with somebody that's responsible, and the CRO or sponsors in. You negotiate back and forth, maybe a few times, and then at some point you'll come to a point in the negotiations in which the person you're negotiating with will say, "Well, I can't approve this. This is beyond my capabilities. I have to take it to the sponsor." They state that in such a way that it seems like, I could, on your end, you're like, I could lose this study, or they're going to the sponsor with this. But that's not the case. The sponsor will just either reject or accept. And typically they actually accept.
And on this topic, so I don't even think you saw this interview, Chris. I did an interview with someone from Metadata. And did you watch that one? Okay, I'll send it to you. But it's very interesting because we got into budgets. We got into a lot of other stuff like cryptocurrencies, but keep it practical for this webinar. We got into budgets. And he said Metadata has a system, and they share it, and they pool data from other vendors who are in charge of site payments, and sponsors license this database to help them negotiate budgets with sites. So they'll map out the country, they'll map out into investigators. If there is a research naive investigator, they will look at the closest comparison. So just like real estate, it's fitting I started out this webinar talking about real estate because it's the same thing. They use comps, right? So they'll say, okay, for this study, this doctor in this zip code did it for this price, right? And this doctor has been doing research for this number of years, and he enrolled this many patients, and they randomized this many. So they know what that doctor's worth for another study, for a future study. If they don't know what you're worth because you're new, they actually will do a comp. So they'll look at other doctors nearby. And so every CRO has a max, every sponsor has a max, but that number is different for every site based on your experience, based on your historical data. So
that would make sense, right? I mean, if a site's going to be more productive, the sponsor's going to be willing to pay a little bit more. I mean, it just only makes sense. If you're going to buy a business and you have two options, one that's barely paying the bills and one that's highly successful, you're probably going to pay more. It just makes good business sense.
Okay, next slide. As it pulls up. So let me give you the talking points, and then you can add some color, okay? So most CROs already know that 20% of sites, so there's the number, 20%. 20% of sites will never negotiate their budget, and that number is like 80 or higher when they're research naive sites, okay? Never negotiate their budget, and they get to keep this as profit for themselves. This is true.
Yep.
Even the metadata guy I talked to, I said, okay, so it's not the sponsors who are trying to keep costs down. Obviously they are, but they know what every investigator is worth, more or less, because of data. So we're living in the age of data now.
Sure.
In case you haven't noticed, this stuff called data rules our lives.
Yep,
okay. So data driven is the whole thing with sites. So sponsors know, okay, this is what we're willing to pay this PI. We'll never go higher than this for this PI because he or she fits into this criteria.
I would like to add a little, I can't think of asterisks to that.
Okay.
So if you can make a just argument on why they need to go higher, they often will. So
Yes.
If for some reason the sponsor says no, we're not, or the CRO says no, we're not going any higher, if you give them a good explanation on why it's necessary for your site for that cost to be higher, oftentimes they will. More often than not, they will, if you can provide a reasonable explanation.
Okay. So sponsors know the max. Yes, you probably could go over, but they can't go over by much. Okay, unless you give a reasonable explanation. So it's not the sponsors to blame. And so then the next thing was, okay, well, it's the CROs, right? This is me asking Metadata guy. For those who haven't watched that interview, go watch it. It's also on the podcast. And he said no comment. So the CROs, what Amy wrote here is accurate, right? They get to keep this as profit for themselves. So
we always assume that was the case.
Mhm.
It was.
And so they'll subsidize the 20% of the sites that the sponsor is willing to overpay, which is where you brought it up. If they offer a valid justification, they might go over. They're willing to do that because they have other sites that are not, and they're leaving a lot on the table.
Sure.
Right? And then most sites, the remaining 60% are somewhere right in between those two extremes, right? So your lack of negotiation can hurt your site and other sites. If you do not negotiate your budget and settle for what they give you, it will set the standard lower for other sites and make it harder for everyone else to negotiate as well. We were talking about comps earlier.
Yep, that makes absolute sense. So if the sponsor they need 30 sites, they have 40 they're interested in. The other 10 will probably wind up being backup sites if all 40 come aboard. They're probably going to take the 30 that they think can do the job at a lesser cost. But if all those 30 were all within this, or all those 40 were in the same price point range, well, on the same budget, then they have another way of selecting those sites, probably geographically or some other way. But you certainly don't want to set the bar too low for payment. It affects everybody, as Dan had stated.
Okay, lack of negotiation can also indicate to the CRO and sponsor that you are not knowledgeable or experienced site. And they probably already know that anyways.
Well, sure. If they're taking on naive sites, they know that right off the bat, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there's nothing further to go there, I don't think.
So yes, the slides will be available. I know there's a lot of people that called in. These slides, everyone who registered is going to get a replay link sent immediately after the webinar is over. And this will go on YouTube later as well. So are given a total budget from the sponsor. And from this total budget, they will allot individual budgets for each site and then pocket the remainder in profit. If the budget negotiations can keep your budget under a certain amount, they get to keep the difference in profit. We used to speculate on this. Now we have confirmed from numerous sources and our own experiences that this is.
What? Sure, makes the case that this is how it works. So
what are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, we actually remember not too long ago. Well, it was a while ago, a couple of years ago. CRO accidentally sent us the total sponsor budget. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Yeah, and it showed us how much they're willing to spend total dollars on all sites, and for say it was 200 completed patients, how much they were willing to spend. Off the top of my head, it was like $2.5 million. So the sponsor allocates that dollar amount. The CRO then has to negotiate and keep it under that amount. And the way the payment system works is the sponsor just gives the CRO that $2.5 million. So if they can keep the total budgets of all sites at, say, $2 million, well, there's $500,000 profit for the CRO. So sure.
And so that's pretty much this slide. The CRO is given incentive to keep your budget as low as possible. As such, they will throw anything and everything at you to keep your costs down, such as the Sunshine Act, requesting third-party documentation. And by the way, the Sunshine Act was never meant to apply to research. No. It's meant to be a transparent way for the public to know what drug companies are paying what doctors.
Yeah, it's funny,
right?
It's funny when they use that.
Yeah, they use it against you because of what you just said. So you need to do better than that. You need to negotiate. Okay. And as long as, like Chris said, as long as you can justify each of these things, they're usually willing to compromise. Even if you're slightly over what they're maxed out at. Okay. So things to keep in mind. There are limits for what you can push for. So the metadata interview was interesting. It shed a lot of light on this topic. You got to watch that one, man. I don't tell you to watch many of these things, but that one you got to watch. So basically, he said negotiation's always going to be important from the site level, but we're going to get to the point where prices are going to be more and more fair as more data comes in. Right?
They're already moving that way. So
say it again?
It's already moving that way. So when I started negotiating budgets about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, so oftentimes I was able to get 50 to 100% increase in the budget. So completed patients started out at 10,000, I was able to move it to 20,000 often, or 15,000, somewhere in that realm, 15 to 20,000 for a completed patient, 50 to 100% increase. Now, I would say the increase best case typically, not always, but typically is about 30%. Best case. They're moving more and more towards fair. Every once in a while, you'll find a sponsor or a CRO that comes with a budget that's ridiculously low, and you wind up doubling it. But that's not as often, or as it doesn't happen as often as it used to. And most price points, when I see budgets, it's like, well, this is reasonable. This is low fare, right? We want to be on the other side of that, right? High fare, at least, if not well above fare. But yeah, most of them come now low fare, where if you had to, you could accept the budget. It's not out of reason.
And the best sites are the ones that are going to be getting most of the increases that they ask for, and all the data is there, or it will be there eventually, right? So a 30% increase is the norm, is what this slide suggests. What do you think about that 30% increase?
I would say that's necessarily the norm. I would say the norm is 20 to 30%. I would 30% is on the higher side these days. Again, I've negotiated many budgets. I typically negotiate about 5 a week. So norm is somewhere 20 to 30% increase. And oftentimes not often, but every once in a while, you'll see a much higher increase. I would say minimum low is 20% increase. On the higher side, it's 30 on average, somewhere in there. I couldn't give a specific number. I don't track that, but somewhere in there.
Okay, so negotiate early. Always negotiate as much of the budget up front if you can. What does that mean? There's back end and front end. Can you give them a rundown?
Okay, so just had this conversation with a client not too long ago as well. So oftentimes when you start the negotiation process with a CRO, you come back to them, they offer their initial budget, you come back to them with a budget, and they'll just come right out and say, listen, total amount we can pay per patient completed is this amount, right? So just make your budget fit that. That's the best we can do. So let's say all the line items are within reason, they're fair. So the way you approach that is the back end is where it's not too important to you. I mean, of course, you want to see them complete. It's good data for the sponsor and CRO. They like to see that, so it's good for your site if you look good. But if you have a patient that there's just no way they're going to complete, then you'd like to get paid the majority of the budget up front. So yeah, whenever you're given that option, hey, this is the total dollar amount we'll pay per completed patient, make sure you put all the costs up front. As much money as you can comes in up front in the first 3-4 visits. That way you're getting 75% of the budget right there for that completed patient.
Yep. Just like Chris said, the first 3 visits of the study are what you're trying to negotiate. Okay. So the CRO will try to keep the budget for towards the end of the study because they count on many subjects not making it that far. So your budget looks like it's bigger, but especially when you have like a difficult study that makes it difficult for subjects to be compliant and makes it difficult for subjects to stay in the study, you don't want a lot of those fees for you to be on the back end, right? So if you wait to negotiate your budget towards the end of the study, you may not be able to receive all of your funds if some subjects drop out. So that's it. If anyone has questions, I know if you're listening live, some people are having audio issues. The webinar will be okay. Okay. We do our best with the connections we have here. What percentage? We have a question, Chris. So what percentage of the budget needs to be negotiated up front for the first 3 visits?
So you want the max, and the max is whatever they're willing to agree to. I couldn't really give you a percentage because that's going to change from CRO and sponsor to sponsor. So, and that depends on how long the study is. So let's make it simple, right? Let's say the study's 4 visits, and the CRO tells you we're going to pay you $10,000 per completed patient for 4 visits. I would probably try to get 60% of that in the first 2 visits. At least 60%, maybe 75. Because again, the way the schedule of assessments works is typically the middle visits, in this case would only be the 3rd visit. The middle visits have lesser assessments, right? The screening, baseline, and then the study visit have all of the assessments, or most of them. So the one visit that you don't care about what you're getting paid on is the 3rd one. So that could be very low. There's no way around that last visit having a significant dollar amount when you negotiate the budget, because there's only a few assessments at the screening visit that are done and not done at the end of the study visit. So it's kind of hard to get around that last visit. It's the middle study visits that you're not concerned about. Those are the ones that you take the lesser dollar amounts.
And why is that for the middle visits?
Again, because they have lesser assessments, right? So the screening and baseline visits have all the assessments, right? So the informed consent, again, this is under the situation in which you're told the total dollar amount they're willing to pay per completed patient, and they don't care how you put together the budget. Just make it fit that total dollar amount. When that occurs, then you can charge $500 for the informed consent. You can charge $1,000 for the first physical, right? The initial physical, and things of that nature that will not occur again. That's where you're looking to really pack it in, make the budget significant on the beginning side. Those assessments don't occur for the rest of the study, except at the end of study visit, where a lot of those assessments will occur again, aside from the initial physical and the informed consent. So those middle study visits, you don't care too much about price points. That's how you front load the budget. Question, but...
Yes, it does. Thank you. So, last question. Do the sponsor or CRO supply what is fair market value for each and every line item in the budget? Like, do they actually let you know that?
No.
Chris says no. They won't, because then you're going to just ask for that, and they're hoping you're going to ask for less than that.
Or, more often, what they're going to do is they're going to know what's within reason, right? And it's going to be a range, because there is no established. It's funny in research, there's very few established certainties in regards to most everything. Right? Wouldn't you agree with that? There's very few established certainties in research. So when it comes to fair market value for a certain assessment, one sponsor will think one price point's fair, and another sponsor will think another price point's very fair. So in my experience, I think the best paying sponsor is AbbVie. They have a budget. The budget they come to you with is high fair, and then they'll usually exceed that by about 25%. So you're going to get a very nice budget with AbbVie. Okay, why they pay so much, I don't know, but they do. So you could say their initial budget is the fair price point, but most sponsors won't even pay what they come to you with initially. What AbbVie comes to your site with initially, most sponsors are unwilling to pay that unless you give them reason why they need to pay that. And that's where we can come in and help negotiate these budgets for you. So there's really no way to answer this question. It varies from sponsor to sponsor.
So the next question is, how many budgets can a CRO negotiate in 1 month? So this, I mean, how many budgets can a CRO sponsor negotiate in 1 month? This varies wildly. So we have Quintiles, and Quintiles probably have, I mean, I think they have like 100,000 employees or slightly under that. And so they can negotiate probably thousands of budgets a month. You have a small CRO like VSCS. Well, we probably have our hands full with like a dozen of these in 1 month. So there's no way to tell. There's no way to notice, to know what a max is for a CRO. Another is, and if there's been any audio issues, the replay should be okay. So our sponsors willing to go considerably beyond budget max for top enrolling sites. Yes, in the past they have been. Going forward, it's going to be less likely to be the case unless you can provide good justification. Our sponsors are willing to go considerably beyond budget max for top enrolling sites. So yes, in the past, going forward, less so the case, in my opinion. But you're going to get more studies. You're going to have more studies. So the general consensus amongst those in the industry is we're going to have a lot more studies in the future, with a lot more studies ending sooner because of big data. And they're going to pay slightly less than we've been accustomed to. Some will be about the same, but we'll make up for it by having more studies. Why not any more is because of the Sunshine Act. And so in the Sunshine Act, which doesn't apply to research, but it does because it's the government, so they don't care. It's just litigation, and they are wanting to keep everything within fair market value. So that arbitrage that was once there, pre-Sunshine Act, may and get paid much more than other sites. If you are a top enrolling site, you will get what is fair for you compared to other sites. In that case, someone asked, and I like this one because this is a great segue to our services, but also you can do it yourself. It's just a lot of work. In that case, how can a research naive site know how much to ask for? This is the conundrum that anyone will face in any business, in any industry when you're just starting out. You don't know, right? Experience. When I started out my social media marketing, I had no idea what to charge. So you charge some people what you think, if they accept it. You charge some people double that. You see if they accept it. Then you double it again. And then if they say, no, that's way too much, then you know. So through experience, you establish a price point per line item, per assessment, per study. You get an Excel sheet the way Chris does it. He has a Excel sheet with a bunch of assessments for the studies we typically do. And over the years, we've established what's fair market value for those assessments. Now, if you don't know how to do this, there's two ways, okay? You can hire us as consultants. We do month to month, $1,000 a month, retainer. Not only do we help you negotiate your budgets, but we'll help you get studies. We'll help you with your feasibility surveys. We'll help you with your source document creation, with your SOPs, with anything else you need. You get one study from us. It pays for our service for the entire year. Or if you want to do it the free way, what I just discussed, one thing I would like to do, or one thing I have done in the past when I had no clue what to ask for, was I looked at Medicare reimbursements for that assessment. Or if they don't have that, it's plus 30%. But again, to do this line item by line item for one study would be a lot of work, and you still may be negotiating too little because you just don't have enough experience. Your color.
I think the best way would be to come to us, at least to utilize our services for 6 months. Let us negotiate your budget and contract. Then you'll see, at least for that particular indication, what's reasonable and fair for each and every line item. and as Dan alluded to, that will more than pay for our services. That one budget, if we were able to get a 30% increase or a total increase of say $60,000 to your overall budget, more than pays for our services over 6 months, which is $6,000. So you walk away with the knowledge of you've gained from how to negotiate your budget, plus an additional $44,000. So ideally, if you're a naive site, 6 months with us, and you'll have a lot more information and make more money in the meantime. That would be my recommendation and color commentary.
Thank you. Yeah, we literally just got off the phone with a client. This is why the webinar started at 12:01 Pacific instead of 12, is because from 11:45 to 12:01, I was on the phone with a client, and one of the things we talked about was negotiating contracts also. So amongst the number of other things. So thank you all for coming on board today, and we will send the replay link out to everybody who registered, and it will also go on YouTube and the podcast, and you'll have the slides as part of the replay. The slides are on there. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris, and hopefully you guys are able to negotiate your budgets going forward. Take care.